Gabriel pushed open the hotel door, asking if he could play their grand piano instead of paying for a room. Security moved forward, but the first notes silenced them, and the billionaire widow upstairs, who'd sworn never to attend another concert, crept down the stairs, tears streaming. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. Gabriel Martinez pushed through the heavy glass doors of the Grandview Hotel, and the warmth hit him like a wall after hours in the November storm. Water dripped from his thin jacket onto marble floors, so polished they reflected the crystal chandeliers above like fallen stars. He was 12 years old, though the weight in his dark eyes suggested someone who had lived much longer. His clothes were threadbare but clean, his backpack worn but carefully maintained, his shoes split at the seams with newspaper stuffed inside to keep out the cold. His fingers were blue, his lips pale, but his spine was straight as he walked across that gleaming lobby toward the front desk, leaving a trail of water behind him like breadcrumbs, leading back to a world he was trying to escape. The hotel breathed luxury. Guests in evening wear moved through the space like dancers, their laughter soft and cultured, their jewelry catching the light. In the center of the atrium stood a magnificent Steinway grand piano, its black surface mirror bright, waiting. Mrs. Chen looked up from the reception desk, her professional smile faltering as she took in the soaked child before her. She was a woman in her mid-40s who had seen enough of life to recognize desperation when it walked through her door, but also enough to recognize dignity. Gabriel stopped before her desk and placed his hands flat on the counter, steadying himself. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet but steady despite the shivering that ran through his small frame. "I need a room for the night." Mrs. Chen's expression softened with something like sorrow. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "our rooms start at $300 per night. Do you have a parent or guardian with you?" Gabriel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "No," he said. "Just me." Mrs. Chen glanced toward the security station where Marcus stood, a stern man in his 50s who took his job seriously. The boy followed her gaze and seemed to understand what was coming. Before she could speak, before Marcus could move forward, Gabriel straightened further and said something that stopped them both. "I don't have money, but I can play. The piano. Could I play for you instead?" The request hung in the air like something fragile. Mrs. Chen blinked, uncertain she had heard correctly. "You want to play the piano instead of paying?" Gabriel nodded once. "My mother taught me. I'm good. I promise I'm good." Around them, guests had begun to notice the scene. Some whispered behind manicured hands. Some stared with pity. Others looked away, uncomfortable with poverty's intrusion into their elegant evening. Marcus moved forward, his hand already reaching for Gabriel's shoulder to escort him out. But Mrs. Chen raised one finger, stopping him. Something in the boy's eyes, some ancient sorrow mixed with desperate hope, made her pause. "One song," she said finally. "If the guests complain, you leave quietly. Agreed?" Gabriel's relief was visible for just a moment before he buried it behind that careful dignity. "Agreed," he said. "Thank you." He walked to the piano as though approaching an altar. His wet jacket came off with slow reverence, folded carefully and placed on the floor beside the bench. He sat, adjusted the seat, and let his hands hover over the keys. They were small hands, scarred in ways that suggested labor too hard for someone his age. He closed his eyes, and the lobby held its breath. Then he began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, Number 2, spilled into the space like water over stones, clear and impossibly pure. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Silverware paused halfway to mouths in the restaurant. A woman's laugh died in her throat. The music was not just technically perfect, though it was that. Every trill was precise, every dynamic shift executed with the confidence of a master. But there was something else, something that shouldn't have been possible from a child. Each note carried weight. Each phrase spoke of loss so profound it had no words. The melody climbed and fell like breathing, like grieving, like remembering someone who would never come back. Marcus's hand, still outstretched to remove the boy, lowered slowly to his side. Mrs. Chen's vision blurred with tears she didn't understand. Not yet, though somewhere deep in her mind she remembered her own son and the funeral where this same piece had played. Upstairs, in the presidential suite, Eleanor Ashford sat in darkness. She had been sitting in darkness for 3 weeks, ever since she had checked into this hotel and refused to leave. Refused to return to the empty mansion that echoed with absence. Eleanor Ashford, 53 years old, CEO of Ashford Pharmaceuticals, worth $3.2 billion, and utterly, devastatingly alone. 6 months ago, her husband of 25 years had died. David Ashford, the renowned conductor, had been leading an orchestra through Beethoven's Seventh when his heart simply stopped. He had collapsed on the podium, and the music had died with him. Eleanor had sworn that day that she would never attend another concert, never let music break her open again, never give sound permission to remind her of what she had lost. But when the first notes of the nocturne drifted up through the hotel's ventilation system, through the closed door of her suite, through the walls she had built around her heart, she froze. Her hand trembled, and the glass of wine she had been holding tipped, spilling red across white carpet like blood. She didn't notice. The music pulled her from her chair like a physical force, like David's hand taking hers one last time. She found herself walking to the door, opening it, moving toward the stairs as though hypnotized. Below, the lobby had transformed into something sacred. Hotel staff emerged from back rooms, drawn by the sound. Guests from the restaurant flooded into the atrium, forming a crowd around the piano, but keeping a respectful distance as though afraid to disturb something holy. Gabriel played on, unaware of them all, lost in the music, lost in memory. His eyes remained closed. His scarred hands moved across the keys with the certainty of someone speaking their native language. Mrs. Chen wept openly now, not caring who saw. Marcus, the security guard, stood frozen, his stern face cracked open by something he couldn't name. A businessman in a $1,000 suit had his hand pressed to his chest. A young couple held each other, swaying slightly, and Eleanor Ashford descended the grand staircase in her designer dress and bare feet, having forgotten her shoes in her rush to reach the source of the music. Her face was wet with tears. Her carefully maintained composure shattered. She reached the bottom of the stairs and stood at the back of the crowd, hands pressed to her mouth, and listened to a 12-year-old boy play piano like someone who had loved and lost everything. The nocturne built to its climax, that moment where Chopin's melody seems to reach toward heaven itself before accepting it cannot stay, before falling back to earth with grace and resignation. Gabriel's hands moved through the final phrases with a tenderness that suggested goodbye. Then silence. 3 heartbeats of perfect, aching silence. Then the crowd erupted into applause, but Gabriel didn't seem to hear it. He opened his eyes slowly, as though waking from a dream. Chen, and nodded with that same careful dignity. "Thank you for listening," he said quietly. "I'll go now." He picked up his wet jacket and started walking toward the door, back into the storm, back into the night. "Wait." The word cut through the applause like a blade. Eleanor's voice, rusty from weeks of silence, but carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. The crowd parted as she moved forward. Gabriel turned, and their eyes met across the gleaming lobby. In that moment, they recognized each other, not faces but something deeper. 2 souls speaking the same language of grief. Eleanor walked to him, and up close, she could see how young he really was, how exhausted, how thin. "Who taught you to play like that?" she asked, and her voice was gentle now, stripped of its executive edge. "My mother," Gabriel said quietly. "Where is she now?" Eleanor already knew the answer before he said it. She could hear it in every note he had played. Gabriel's pause was long, his dark eyes steady on hers. "She died," he said, 43 days ago. Around them, the crowd went silent again, but this time it was the silence of witnesses, of people who had stumbled into a moment too sacred to interrupt. Eleanor felt something crack open in her chest, something she had been keeping carefully locked. This child, this 12-year-old boy with scarred hands and dignity like armor, had just played her husband's favorite piece with the kind of soul-deep understanding that came only from knowing grief intimately. "Get him a room," Eleanor said, turning to Mrs. Chen without taking her eyes off Gabriel. "The best one available. Put it on my account." "I don't need charity," Gabriel said immediately, his spine straightening further. "I can work. I can clean rooms or wash dishes or—" "You already did," Eleanor interrupted him gently. "That performance was worth far more than a room." Their eyes held. Behind Gabriel's careful control, Eleanor could see the question he was too afraid to ask. "Where have you been for 43 days? Where were you going?" And behind her own carefully reconstructed walls, Gabriel could see matching questions. "Why are you here alone? Why does my music make you cry?" Neither spoke these questions aloud. Not yet. But they both understood that something had shifted in the universe, that two trajectories had intersected in this hotel lobby in ways neither of them could have predicted, that a boy with nothing had offered the only thing he had left, and a woman with everything had recognized it as priceless. Mrs. Chen was already typing on her computer, tears still wet on her cheeks. "Room 214, she said softly. "It has a view of the city." The applause had faded, but the crowd remained, as though reluctant to let the moment end. Marcus stepped forward, but this time not to escort Gabriel out. "Let me take your jacket, son," he said gruffly. "We'll get it dried." Gabriel looked at Eleanor one more time, and she nodded. A silent promise that this was real, that she wasn't going to disappear. Then he let Marcus lead him toward the elevators, his small figure dwarfed by the vast lobby, by the impossibility of what had just happened. Eleanor stood watching him go, one hand still pressed to her chest where her heart was beating too fast. She hadn't felt anything in 6 months except the crushing weight of absence. Now she felt something else. Purpose. Connection. The terrifying possibility that she wasn't finished living after all. Around her, guests began to disperse, returning to their dinners and their lives. But they would all remember this night. The night a homeless child played Chopin in a 5-star hotel and reminded them all that beauty and heartbreak live in the same house. Mrs. Chen approached Eleanor carefully. "Mrs. Ashford," she said quietly, "I didn't know you were still staying with us." Eleanor turned to her, and for the first time in weeks, something like a smile touched her lips. "I wasn't sure I was either," she said. "Until tonight." An hour later, Gabriel sat in Eleanor's presidential suite, wearing a hotel robe that swallowed his small frame, his hair still damp from the shower, steam still clinging to his skin like a second ghost. Eleanor had ordered hot chocolate and food. More food than one child could eat. Sandwiches and soup and fruit and pastries, arranged on silver trays that caught the lamplight. She sat across from him in an armchair, not speaking, not pressing, just waiting with the patience of someone who understood that some stories could not be rushed. Gabriel's hands wrapped around the mug of chocolate, seeking its warmth, and slowly, hesitantly, he began to talk. His mother's name was Sophia Martinez. She had been a concert pianist once, gifted and promising, destined for stages across the world. Then she got pregnant, and the father left before Gabriel was born. Disappeared like smoke. And Sophia had made a choice. She gave up the concert halls and the applause and the life she had dreamed of. She raised Gabriel alone, worked 3 jobs, cleaned houses, and waited tables, and gave piano lessons to children whose parents could afford them. She taught Gabriel everything she knew, every scale and chord and piece, every truth about music being more than notes on a page. 6 months ago, the coughing started, then the weight loss, then the diagnosis that fell like an axe. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. They had no insurance. Sophia refused charity with the same dignity her son would later carry into a hotel lobby. She worked until her hands shook too badly to hold a tray, until her body simply gave out. She died in their small apartment 43 days ago, and Gabriel had held her hand until the end, playing Chopin on his phone because they had no piano anymore. They had sold it months before to pay for medicine that only delayed the inevitable. The landlord evicted him the next day. No family, no guardian, no one to claim him. Child services came, but Gabriel ran, terrified of being locked away from the only things he had left of his mother, her teachings and the music and the memory of her hands guiding his across piano keys. He had been surviving on the streets ever since, playing in subway stations and parks, anywhere someone might drop $1 in his open case. He slept in shelters when he could, doorways when he could not. And tonight, he had come to the Grandview Hotel because his mother had talked about it once, years ago, her eyes distant with memory. She had performed here before Gabriel was born, before everything changed, and she had said it was magical. Gabriel's voice broke on that last word, and Eleanor felt her heart break with it. She saw in this child's grief a mirror of her own, saw in his love for his mother the same fierce devotion she had felt for David. This boy's connection to music was pure, untainted by business or fame or ego. The thing she had lost and forgotten existed. "You don't play piano, Gabriel," Eleanor said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "You speak through it." Gabriel looked up at her, his dark eyes shining. "Mom used to say that," he whispered. "She said music is the language of souls talking to each other." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then she leaned forward, her hands clasped between her knees. "Stay," she said. "Not just tonight. Stay until you figure out what comes next." Gabriel's spine straightened, that familiar defense rising. "I won't be a charity case," he said. Eleanor smiled, sad and understanding. "Then earn it," she said. "Play for me, every evening. Let me remember why music matters." Gabriel studied her face, searching for dishonesty and finding none. Finally, cautiously, he nodded. The first week unfolded like a gentle awakening. Gabriel played for Eleanor every evening in her suite. Chopin and Beethoven and Brahms, pieces his mother had taught him, pieces that carried memory in every measure. During the days, he wandered the hotel, unable to sit still, unable to accept rest without earning it. He helped, despite the staff's protests. He reorganized Mrs. Chen's filing system with a logic that made her weep with gratitude. He taught the chef's daughter mathematics at the kitchen table during her homework hour, explaining fractions with the patience of someone who understood that learning was a gift. He repaired the ancient lobby clock that had been broken for months, his clever fingers finding the stuck gear, his mechanical intuition surprising everyone. The staff fell in love with him slowly and then all at once. His quiet dignity, his sharp mind, his gentle humor that emerged like sunlight through clouds. He never asked for anything, never presumed, never forgot to say thank you. Mrs. Chen brought him extra pastries. Marcus taught him chess in the security office during slow hours. The housekeepers left small gifts in his room, new socks and books, and a winter coat that actually fit. Gabriel told Eleanor more about his mother as trust built between them. The scars on his hands came from washing dishes in restaurant kitchens, scalding water and sharp knives, work he had taken after school to earn money for Sophia's medicine. His education was entirely from home, Sophia teaching him literature and history and science between her jobs, and he was reading at college level, devouring books like oxygen. His dreams lived in his mother's voice. "Mom wanted me to go to Juilliard," he said one evening, his fingers still resting on piano keys. "I promised her I would, but I don't know how anymore." Eleanor listened and said nothing, but inside her mind was already working, already planning. She began emerging from her suite during the day, making phone calls, attending to business she had neglected for weeks. The hotel staff noticed the change. The haunted look in her eyes was fading, replaced by something like purpose. She asked Gabriel questions about his education, about his dreams, about what his mother had wanted for him, and she listened to every answer as though it mattered more than empires. 1 week after Gabriel arrived, Eleanor gave him a key. It was old brass, heavy and ornate, and it unlocked the hotel's private music room on the 3rd floor. "My husband donated the piano in there," Eleanor said, watching Gabriel's face. "It's a Bosendorfer Imperial Grand, one of the finest instruments in the world. He would want you to play it." Gabriel's reverence when he entered that room was complete. The piano waited in soft lamplight, its surface gleaming, its presence commanding. He approached it like a pilgrim approaching a shrine, touched the keys with trembling fingers, and wept. That night, and every night after, Gabriel would slip into the music room late, when the hotel slept, and play. He worked through his grief, measure by measure, poured his heart into melodies that spoke the things he could not say. What he did not know was that Eleanor stood in the doorway each night, listening in the darkness, feeling her own grief loosen its grip with every note. Then Miss Patterson arrived. She was a woman in her late 40s, with kind eyes and a tired face. A Child Protective Services worker who had seen too much suffering and still cared too much to become numb. She found Gabriel in the lobby on the 8th day, and the warmth drained from the world. "Gabriel Martinez," she said, not unkindly. "We've been looking for you." Gabriel froze, every muscle tensing for flight. Eleanor appeared from nowhere, positioning herself between them with all the authority of her wealth and power. "He's with me," Eleanor said coldly. Miss Patterson's expression was sympathetic but immovable. "Mrs. Ashford, I understand you've been kind to this boy, but he's a minor without a legal guardian. The law is clear. He needs to enter the foster system." The timeline was 3 days. In 3 days, they would come to collect him. Eleanor's fury was volcanic. "I won't let them take him," she said, her voice shaking. But Miss Patterson only looked sad. "You're not family," she said gently. "You have no legal claim." After she left, Gabriel sat in Eleanor's suite, his face pale, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He told her then about his brief time in foster care when Sophia had been hospitalized, the sterile rooms and the cold efficiency, and the feeling of being a problem to solve rather than a person to know. "They don't understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They'll put me somewhere where there's no piano, and if I can't play, I can't talk to her anymore." Eleanor understood then what the piano truly meant. It was not just music. It was Gabriel's connection to his dead mother, his lifeline to the only love he had ever known, the language they had shared. She knelt before him, took his face in her hands. "Let me become your legal guardian," she said. Gabriel's shock was total. "Why would you do that?" he asked. "Because you saved my life," Eleanor said, and her voice broke on the truth of it. "I was drowning in grief, and your music threw me a rope. Because I have everything except what matters, and you have nothing except what matters most." But the legal process would take months. Character witnesses and home studies and evaluations. Miss Patterson was coming in 3 days. Eleanor made phone calls, used every connection she had, called in favors from judges and lawyers and politicians. But even billionaires cannot bypass child welfare law quickly, and time was running out. Then Eleanor had an idea, desperate and audacious. She would host a benefit concert at the hotel for children's welfare programs. She would invite the mayor, city officials, reporters, everyone who mattered. The real goal was not charity, but proof. Proof that Gabriel was not a homeless orphan, but an extraordinary talent who deserved protection, who deserved a chance. But Gabriel would have to perform publicly, something he had never done. When Eleanor proposed it, Gabriel's face went white. "I play for Mom," he said. "For you. I can't play for strangers." The pressure of it crushed him. What if he failed? What if they took him anyway? Eleanor did not push, but she said quietly, "This is how we fight. Not with money or power, with the truth of who you are." The night before the concert, Gabriel sat in the music room unable to play. His hands shook. His mind went blank. Every time he tried to touch the keys, panic seized him. Eleanor found him there, his head in his hands, his body trembling. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Yes, I do," Gabriel said, looking up at her with tears streaming. "Mom always said, when you're most afraid, play the thing that scares you most." He took a breath that shuddered through his whole frame. "I'll play Mr. Ashford's final piece, the one he was conducting when he died." Eleanor's knees nearly gave out. That piece was brutal, meant for full orchestra, barely playable on solo piano. But more than that, it was the last thing David had touched, the last beauty he had given the world. "He'd be honored," she whispered through her tears. The concert night arrived with the weight of judgment. 200 guests filled the hotel's ballroom. High society in glittering gowns, city officials in perfect suits, reporters with cameras and notebooks. Miss Patterson sat in the third row, her face carefully neutral. Backstage, Gabriel stood in the new suit Eleanor had insisted on buying, though he had tried to refuse. Tried to maintain his dignity even now. His hands were still scarred, visible reminders of all he had sacrificed. His eyes were terrified but determined, the look of someone about to walk into fire because there was no other choice. Eleanor stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "you are not alone anymore." Gabriel nodded once, then walked toward the stage where the Steinway waited under lights, where 200 strangers waited to judge whether he deserved to keep the only family he had left, where his entire future balanced on the fragile hope that music could speak louder than law. Eleanor walked onto the stage first, her heels clicking against polished wood, and the ballroom fell silent. She stood at the microphone, this woman who commanded boardrooms and pharmaceutical empires, and her voice trembled just slightly as she spoke. She told them about a 12-year-old boy who had walked into the Grandview Hotel, soaked and shivering, and asked to play piano instead of paying for a room. She told them, with Gabriel's permission given hours before, with a solemn nod, about Sophia Martinez, who had given up concert stages to raise her son alone, who had taught him everything she knew, who had died 43 days ago, leaving him with nothing but music and memory. She told them about grief and genius, about dignity in the face of impossible loss, about a child who had survived on streets and subway platforms because he carried something too precious to abandon. The crowd's faces shifted from polite attention to something sharper, curiosity mixed with skepticism, the look of people who had heard many sob stories and learned not to trust them too easily. Then Eleanor stepped back and Gabriel walked forward. He was so small on that vast stage, his new suit crisp but unable to hide the thinness of his frame, his scarred hands visible even from the back row. He walked to the Steinway Grand with the same careful dignity he had carried into the hotel lobby, sat on the bench, adjusted it with precise movements, and let his hands hover over the keys. They trembled. Everyone could see them trembling. He closed his eyes, and his lips moved in a whisper that no one could hear, but that would be revealed later in quiet conversation. "This is for you, Mom, and for Mr. Ashford, and for Eleanor, who brought me home." Then he began to play. David Ashford's Symphony No. 3 in D minor, arranged for solo piano, a piece so technically brutal it was barely playable by a single person, a piece meant for full orchestra with strings and brass and percussion, a piece that demanded everything a musician had to give, and then demanded more. Gabriel gave it everything. The first movement erupted from the piano like a storm, notes cascading over each other in complex harmonies, his small hands stretching across keys that seemed too far apart, his body swaying with the force of the music. It was joy, pure and unbridled, the kind of joy that comes before loss teaches caution. The crowd's skepticism began to crack. This was not just competent. This was not just good. This was something else entirely. The second movement shifted to melancholy, a melody that wound through minor keys like a river through a dark forest, each phrase a question without answer, each resolution temporary and fragile. It spoke of loss so profound that words would only cheapen it. In the third row, Miss Patterson's carefully neutral expression began to dissolve. Tears gathered in her eyes. Around her, city officials who had come expecting a publicity stunt found themselves unable to look away, unable to maintain their professional distance. The third movement built like a fever, struggle made audible, dissonance and resolution fighting for dominance. Gabriel's hands moving so fast they blurred, his breath coming hard, sweat gathering on his forehead. This was the movement David Ashford had been conducting when his heart stopped, when he fell from the podium and the music died with him. Eleanor sat in the front row and heard her husband's music reborn through a 12-year-old boy's hands. She heard it as David had meant it to be, pure and unfiltered, stripped of commercial consideration and critical analysis. Music as direct emotional truth. She realized with a shock that cut through her chest that she had been angry. Angry at David for leaving her. Angry at God or fate, or the universe for taking him. Angry at herself for not being enough to make him stay. Gabriel's music released something in her, some terrible knot that had been choking her heart for 6 months. And she began to cry. Not the bitter tears of the past weeks, but something cleaner, something that felt like healing. Then Gabriel faltered. Midway through the fourth movement, his hands struck a wrong chord. The dissonance jarred the room. His hands froze over the keys. The crowd tensed, leaning forward, holding their breath. For 3 seconds that lasted an eternity, Gabriel sat motionless. And everyone thought he would break, would run, would prove himself just a traumatized child after all. But he did not stop. His hands moved again, not back to correct the error but forward into improvisation, weaving the wrong note into something new, something that had not existed in David Ashford's original composition. And then something extraordinary happened. Gabriel began to play phrases that were distinctly different in style, gentler melodies that carried a woman's touch. Sophia Martinez speaking through her son's hands, her musical voice answering the themes David Ashford had written. Back and forth the conversation went. The dead conductor's bold, dramatic phrases met by the dead pianist's lyrical responses, and between them, Gabriel's own voice emerging, a third presence mediating and unifying, a child speaking to the parents he had lost. Both of them, building a bridge between grief and hope. Tears streamed down Gabriel's face, but his hands never wavered. This was no longer a performance. This was a conversation between the living and the dead, between loss and love, between the family that had been torn apart and the family being forged in its place. When the final chord rang out, when Gabriel's hands lifted from the keys and the last vibration faded into silence, no one moved. The stillness was absolute, sacred. The pause before the world remembers how to breathe. Then the ballroom erupted. 200 people rose to their feet as one, applause crashing like waves. And it was not polite appreciation but something raw and overwhelming. Grown men wept openly. Women clutched each other. Mayor Rodriguez had his hand pressed to his heart. Miss Patterson was sobbing into her hands. But Gabriel did not acknowledge any of it. He stood from the bench, turned, and walked directly to Eleanor. His eyes found hers across the stage, and she opened her arms and he walked into them, this child who had been alone for 43 days. And she held him while the applause thundered around them. "Did I do okay?" he whispered against her shoulder, his voice small and uncertain despite everything. "You reminded me why we're alive." Miss Patterson approached after the applause finally faded, and everyone in the ballroom tensed, waiting for judgment. But her face had transformed. The bureaucratic mask was gone, replaced by naked emotion. "In 20 years of social work," she said, her voice thick, "I have never seen anything like that." She looked at Gabriel, really looked at him, not as a case file but as a person. "Tell me the truth," she said gently. "Do you want to stay with Mrs. Ashford?" Gabriel's answer was simple and devastating in its honesty. "She's the only family I have left. And I think—" He paused, glanced at Eleanor. "I think I'm the only family she has left too." Miss Patterson turned to Eleanor, and her expression was softer now, but still serious. "The process will take time," she said. but I'll recommend emergency temporary guardianship. You'll need to pass all evaluations, complete training, and meet every requirement." And there was steel in her voice, the tone of someone who had built an empire and would not be denied this one thing that truly mattered. Mayor Rodriguez pushed through the crowd, his eyes still red. His daughter had studied under David Ashford, he revealed, voice shaking with emotion. When they could not afford tuition, David had given her a full scholarship, changed her life completely. "Let me return the favor," the mayor said. "I'll expedite the process, provide character witnesses, do everything in my power to help." The reporters swarmed then, cameras flashing, questions shouted. But Eleanor shielded Gabriel with her body, one arm around his shoulders. One reporter broke through the chaos, thrust a microphone toward Gabriel. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" she asked. Gabriel looked at her, then at Eleanor, then back. "I want to be like my mom," he said quietly. "And, like Eleanor, I want to use music to help people remember they're not alone." The quote was on social media within minutes, shared thousands of times, the story spreading like wildfire across the city and then the country, the tale of a homeless musical prodigy and the billionaire widow who became his family. 6 weeks later, the legal documents were signed. Emergency temporary guardianship had become full legal guardianship after home studies and evaluations and character witnesses and every hoop the system required Eleanor to jump through. She had jumped through them all without complaint, had attended parenting classes and therapy sessions and court hearings with the same fierce determination she brought to corporate negotiations. Gabriel moved into Eleanor's penthouse. Not the hotel. His own request because he needed a real home, not luxury but belonging. His room had his mother's old piano that Eleanor had tracked down in storage and had restored, its keys the same ones Sophia's hands had touched. Photographs of Sophia covered one wall, her smile captured in fading prints, her presence honored. But there were also new things, new clothes in the closet and books on the shelves, and a stability that settled over Gabriel like a blanket. He enrolled in an elite private school where teachers quickly learned that this quiet boy, with scarred hands, could solve calculus problems that baffled seniors and wrote essays that made them cry. He took courses at the music conservatory on weekends, studying under masters who recognized his gift and treated it with reverence. Eleanor returned to work, but different now, more present, more purposeful. No longer treating her company as an escape from grief, but as a tool for creating good in the world. She started a foundation in Sophia Martinez's name. Scholarships for young musicians from low-income families. Children who had talent and passion, but no resources. Gabriel performed at fundraisers, played for donors, and on weekends he taught younger students, passing on his mother's gift the way she had passed it to him. One evening, 6 weeks after the guardianship was finalized, Gabriel and Eleanor sat in her living room in comfortable domestic peace. Gabriel played the piano softly, working through a Schubert sonata, while Eleanor worked on her laptop, reviewing pharmaceutical research, the two of them existing in the same space with the ease of family. Gabriel stopped playing mid-phrase and turned to her. "Do you think Mom would be happy?" he asked. "That I'm here, with you?" Eleanor looked up from her screen, removed her reading glasses. "I think your mother knows you're loved," she said gently. "I think that's all she ever wanted." "What about Mr. Ashford?" Gabriel asked. "Do you think he'd mind sharing you?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I think he sent you to me," she said. "When I needed family most, you appeared. That's not coincidence." Gabriel nodded slowly, thinking. Then he gestured to the piano bench. "Sit with me," he said. "I wrote something. It's not very good, but I want you to hear it." Eleanor sat beside him, their shoulders touching. Gabriel placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The composition was original, uniquely his. A melody that carried both hope and bittersweetness, major keys that acknowledged minor sorrows, a musical narrative that spoke of loss, transformed into love. It was beautiful in the way that truth is beautiful, unpolished but authentic, the sound of a heart learning to hope again. "I call it The language of home, Gabriel said softly as he played. It's about finding family in unexpected places. Eleanor listened with tears streaming down her face, and when he finished, when the last chord faded, she pulled him into her arms. It's perfect, she whispered. I still miss her, Gabriel said into Eleanor's shoulder. Every day. I still miss him, Eleanor said. Every day. But it hurts less, Gabriel said. When you're not alone. When you're not alone, Eleanor agreed. They sat together as the city lights glittered through the windows. Two people who had been broken finding wholeness in each other, the piano between them like an altar to the family they had built from the ruins of the families they had lost. 1 year later, Gabriel walked onto the stage at Carnegie Hall. He was 13 now, taller, still carrying that quiet dignity, but wearing it with confidence. No longer armor against the world, but simple self-possession. The concert had sold out in 3 hours, every seat claimed by people who had heard his story, who wanted to witness this young genius who had survived the unsurvivable. The program included classical pieces, Chopin and Brahms and Beethoven, but also David Ashford's Symphony No. 3 and Gabriel's own composition, The Language of Home. In the front row sat Eleanor, beaming with pride so fierce it made her heart hurt. Beside her was an empty seat with Sophia Martinez's photograph placed carefully on the cushion. Gabriel's request, his mother present in the only way she could be now. Around them sat Mrs. Chen from the Grandview Hotel, Marcus, the security guard who had almost thrown Gabriel out into the storm, Mayor Rodriguez with his wife and daughter, Miss Patterson who had fought for Gabriel within the system, the chef whose daughter Gabriel had tutored, housekeepers and bellhops, and all the hotel staff who had watched a homeless child become family. This was the family Gabriel had built, piece by piece, heart by heart. Gabriel walked to center stage and bowed to the audience. But before he sat at the piano, he turned to Eleanor and signed, I love you in American Sign Language, something Sophia had taught him years ago as their secret language. Eleanor signed it back, tears already gathering, and the audience who understood what they were witnessing began to applaud softly. Gabriel sat, placed his hands on the keys, and began to play. That night at the Grandview Hotel, a 12-year-old boy asked to play piano instead of paying for a room. He had nothing but grief and genius. She had everything but purpose and peace. Neither knew that in that moment they were both asking the same question. Can someone love me as I am, broken and searching? And neither knew that the answer would be the same. Yes, always. Yes. Gabriel's story reminds us that family is not always born. Sometimes it is chosen, that genius without love is empty, and love without expression is silent. That in our darkest moments, when we think we have nothing to offer, we might be giving someone else exactly what they need to survive. The boy who played for a room found a home. The woman who had stopped listening found her song again, and somewhere Sophia Martinez and David Ashford were smiling, watching the family their love had created even in death, watching two broken people become whole through the simple act of showing up for each other. If this story moved you, share it, because somewhere tonight there is another Gabriel looking for home, and another Eleanor looking for purpose, and maybe, just maybe, they will find each other. Maybe somewhere right now, a child is walking through a storm carrying nothing but talent and terror, and someone is sitting in darkness thinking they have nothing left to give, and they are about to discover that they are exactly what the other needs. Because that is what family does. That is what love does. It finds us in our brokenness and says, you are enough. You are wanted. You are home. Gabriel played and Eleanor watched, and both were finally at peace. The music swelling through Carnegie Hall like a prayer, like a promise, like the language of souls talking to each other across the impossible distances of loss and hope and love that refuses to die.